Who did the Lucky Charms? You guys didn't do the Lucky Charms.
No, that was done by another studio.
Oh.
You see, the thing is, what they did, General Mills had all these things, but they had a number of agencies which they worked with, and we became, after we started the trick stuff, we became the studio to do the tricks commercials. And another studio would be doing Lucky Charms, another studio would be doing some of the others, but we did some Lucky Charms. Every night we'd get one of those to do, but mainly we did Tricks Rabbit.
Why didn't Lucky ever turn himself into something those kids didn't want to, like having to do with, like a big pile of dog crap or something, you know? I mean, it's like, I'll turn myself into a boat. I'll turn myself into a balloon.
I had nothing. I had nothing to do with that.
So let's back up a little bit and talk a little bit about your Bullwinkle again. Jay Ward did not want the Bullwinkle show being done in Mexico. He wanted to do it himself in Hollywood, right?
Jay Ward was very put out that they had it in Mexico. And he said, see, now I didn't work for Jay Ward. I worked for Producers Associates of Television. Now, there is wheels within wheels within wheels on what was the whole operation was crooked as a dog's hind leg. And I don't know whether
And you heard it here first, folks.
I don't know whether I ought to put this on tape. Where's this going to show? Because this is a dirty story.
So the Mexican artists had no respect for what they were doing.
No,
Jay Ward didn't want.
No, Jay Ward didn't want it down there, and the Mexicans didn't understand the thing, and they thought it was a bunch of junk. The American staff didn't care about it; they were just taking the money, and I was the only one that cared. But
a lone man.
But Jay Ward,
against.
Somebody commented that my name is not on it. Well, Jay Ward swore that if it went to Mexico, that nobody from PAT would get one line of screen credit. And so none of the Mexicans were given any screen credit, and none of the working supervisors were given any screen credit. And that's why nobody but Jay Ward's staff's name is on it, because Jay Ward is the one that did the title, so he had control over that.
So, and weren't you talking somewhere earlier about the fact that it was painted with house paint?
Oh yeah, well what happened was that, you see up here we paint with cell vinyl, we have cartoon colors, we have commercially made colors that are made to go on acetate. Well, they didn't have any cell vinyl down in Mexico, and there was a guy down there named Frank Hirsch, who was a painter. He married some Mexican woman, but he was painting in Mexico, and Frank was having to go on the cheap, and so he was experimenting around, and he found out that he could paint with a latex house paint. So Frank was recruited to be head of the background department, and so he comes in, he's painting the background with house paint, and the paint they were using trying to paint the cells with wasn't staying on too well, so they decided to experiment with this house paint, and it worked out real well. So the whole thing was painted with house paint through the years.
And he eventually went to, when he got cell paint, he went out and painted his house with cell paint, right? I mean, he forgot and.
But the thing is now, when we opened up the second unit to do commercials, now the client didn't care what the show looked like, but his commercials were a little jewel. So when we finally started doing the commercials down there, then we did get to go to the States and stock up on cell colors, and so the Tricks Rabbit was painted with stuff that was made for film.
Well, it's very interesting. Tex is a very animated person in real life, and it's funny. Animators always have a certain way that they act, and they're very expressive.
Well, the one thing we had to figure out. You see, I used to say I was an animated cartoonist, but this gives you the wrong impression. That means I'm like this. I'm an animator, but I'm not an animated cartoonist. maybe sometimes I'm more animated than other times.
You're very spontaneous, and you come up with some of the funniest ad-libs I've ever heard. Some of your stories are just amazing. I wish you could remember some of them.
Well, one of my best ad-libs was done in Mexico. There was an animator down there named Carlos Sandoval, who claimed to be the oldest animator in Mexico. And Carlos spoke fluent English, and he was the titular Mexican head of the animation department. at Gamma where we were doing Bullwinkle. But Sandy's main job was to act as translator between the Mexican staff and the American staff. But of course, we had a bunch of young guys working for us, and in a very few years, well, Sandy wasn't needed for that. These guys were speaking fluent English in a very short time. But he stayed on as a supervisor. So one day, it must have been around St. Patrick's Day, I went in. I was wearing a green tie. So Sandy commented, says, "Tex, you're wearing a green tie. Are you Irish?" And I said, "No, I'm a gringo." And, Sandy thought that was the funniest joke he ever heard. Really broke him up. And to the day I left Mexico, I could never get in that guy's sight before he just collapsed all over again.
I like this joke about the ad lib at the party in New York.
Well, now okay. What happened was probably my greatest ad lib was at a party in New York where Tom Henderson, who was an outstanding magazine cartoonist, and he was also had the status of being a Saturday Evening Post cartoonist, was there with his wife Mary Lou. And every time I saw Mary Lou was always pregnant. Every time I see Mary Lou, she's pregnant, and here she's at this party, she's pregnant again. So I said to Tom, "Tom, how do these things happen?" He says, "I don't know, Tex." He says, "All I do is come home, shake hands with her, and next thing I know, she's pregnant." And so just off the top of my head, before I could stop myself, I said, "Well, what you better do, you better start wearing rubber gloves." And it brought down the house, and if it had been premeditated, I probably wouldn't have said it, but but the whole room collapsed.
Well, if you had a favorite story to tell about all of your adventures as an animator, could you think of something that you know?
All my favorite stories. Oh, I got
so many of them.
I got so many favorite stories. I don't know offhand. I'll give you an example. You see, good animation is done. You heard of drawing out of the right side of the brain. The left side is the judgmental side, and the right side is the creative side. And to do good animation, lots of times, if you shut off the judgmental side, you can get and let the right side take over. You get a stronger piece of animation. So I was working at Alexander Film Company in Colorado Springs, and I wanted to go home for Christmas, and they couldn't spare me, and I'm miffed. And I'm working on a spot about it's a bread spot about this aunt and uncle who are going in the jungle to look for their nephew who's been lost in the jungle, and of course they take along a lot of that good rainbow bread to keep them on the trip. And so and they're making camp, and this lion jumps into the clearing, and of course they drop the bread and run back, and the lion is about to take a bite of the bread, and this baby Tarzan drops in and faces the lion. Now I hadn't figured out what the kid was going to do to drive off the lion. I didn't know whether he was going to punch him in the nose or startle the lion or what. But I'm sitting there, I'm miffed as hell, and without any behest from me, the lion roars, raises his mouth and roars at it, and the kid opens his mouth twice as wide and just sinks his teeth in the lion's nose. and I was just taking out my frustration, And my sound man gave me a wonderful scream, and then a yapping sound, and the lion runs off in the jungle. So I was just blowing off steam. I didn't even know if they'd let me use it, but we left it in the thing. Now they had a lot of tourists going through Alexander Film Company.